Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. By the time the first footage reached the news, I already knew the system was breaking. Trains are not supposed to stop, even when the passengers vanish and freight dries up. The network keeps moving for a while out of habit, momentum, and contracts that no one reads. When dispatchers started stacking trains on the main line outside the city and shutting down routes without warning, I understood that this was not a storm or a strike. Something had broken at the foundation. My name is Daniel Cole. Before the outbreak, I was a railway engineer and maintenance of way supervisor. I spent years walking tracks, crawling under locomotives, writing up inspection reports that nobody read unless something went wrong. When it finally did, all that boring knowledge turned into my only advantage. I did not try to leave on the highway. I had enough sense to know that millions of people with the same idea would turn every interstate into a parking lot. Instead, I drove my old pickup out of the city and aimed for forgotten rail lines that I knew still threaded through the countryside. And I aimed for a place most people had never heard of: Riverside Yard. Riverside was 10 miles outside the city, jammed between a river on one side and a strip of dry industrial land on the other. For decades, it had been a small classification yard for local freights. Then, the company shifted operations to a larger, modern facility further west and mothballed Riverside. A few skeleton crews had kept an eye on it for a while. Then budgets got tight and it was closed temporarily. That temporary closure became permanent. To everyone else, Riverside was an abandoned rail yard with rusting tracks and old buildings. To me, it was a place where equipment sometimes went to sleep and never woke up. I figured there might still be hardware there. Maybe even a locomotive or two that someone forgot to scrap. When the first confirmed reports of infected violence hit my phone, I was already halfway there. They said the infected were fast and relentless. They said a bite was almost always fatal. They also said the situation was under control. I had walked through enough accident scenes to know when people were lying to themselves. The road to Riverside was already showing signs of panic. I passed a small gas station with every pump roped off, the windows broken, and abandoned cars jutting out at odd angles. 2 miles later, an ambulance sat in a ditch with its rear doors open and one stretcher toppled onto the grass. There was no one inside. I stayed in the truck and kept moving. When I finally turned onto the cracked access road that led to Riverside Yard, I felt something I hadn't felt since my first day on the job. It was a clear, practical sense that this was where I needed to be. Not because it was safe, because it was familiar, and the rules here were rules I understood. Steel, wood, diesel, gravity, things that did not change. The gate at the yard entrance hung half open, bent off its hinges. Grass, waist-high in places, pushed up through the gravel. The main office building, a low brick rectangle, stared out with boarded windows and a faded company logo you could barely read. Beyond it, I could see the lines of track spreading into the distance, choked with weeds and rust. I parked near the office and shut the engine off. For a few seconds, the silence pressed in. No traffic, no distant highway noise, just wind moving through tall grass and the tick of cooling metal under my hood. I got out and locked the truck out of habit, even though I knew locks meant very little now. My gear was simple: a canvas backpack with tools and basic supplies, a crowbar, a flashlight, a compact 9mm pistol I'd inherited from my father, with 3 magazines loaded and taped together the way he had liked to do when he worked security years ago. I was not a soldier, I was an engineer, but I knew how to handle a firearm safely and accurately. These days, that mattered. I moved through the yard slowly, checking corners and doorways. The office building was empty, chairs overturned, papers scattered, a coffee mug fossilized with dried residue on someone's old desk. I took the master keys from the hook where they still hung by the door to the yard foreman's office and moved on. The first time I saw one of them, I was in the mechanical shop. The shop was a long steel building parallel to the tracks, with wide doors where locomotives and freight cars used to roll in for inspection. Inside, dust lay over everything. Tool chests, workbenches, air compressors. A floor jack stood frozen under an invisible job that had never been finished. The smell hit me first. Not the sharp chemical smell of oil and solvents, something stale and sickly that overrode everything else. My heart rate climbed, but I forced myself to keep my breathing steady. I moved between workbenches toward the back office and locker area. Pistol ready, safety off, barrel pointed down. I heard a sound behind the lockers. Not speech, a low, rough exhale. "Hello?" I said before I could stop myself. The thing that stepped out had once been a man about my age. Clothing torn, skin a strange, unhealthy color, eyes unfocused but locked on me in a way that felt wrong. His lower arm was stained dark, and the hand hung at an angle that made no sense for a living joint. His movements were jerky but fast. His mouth opened in a sudden, harsh breath like someone who had been running. I raised the pistol and shouted, "Stop!" He did not stop. I fired once, center mass. The sound slammed around the metal walls and came back at me. He staggered but did not collapse. He kept coming with that same staggering run. The second shot was higher. He dropped fast and skidded on the concrete, coming to rest a few feet from my boots. I stepped back, keeping the pistol trained on him for a long moment. I had seen human bodies before. I had seen traumatic injuries, twisted limbs, burns, damage from heavy machinery. This was different because there was nothing left in the eyes. No confusion, no fear, only motion. Then nothing. Whatever this infection did, it replaced the person even before the body failed. The sound of the shots worried me more than the one infected on the floor. Noise travels. I moved quickly to the nearest doorway and scanned outside. Nothing. No movement in the yard. No running shapes, no answering sounds. Either there were no infected close enough to hear it, or there were so many other noises in the distance now that my shots were just more chaos. I holstered the pistol, wiped my hands on my jeans, and forced my mind back to the reason I was here. If I was going to survive, I needed something that could move, carry supplies, and push through the country without getting trapped. Cars and trucks needed roads that would clog with abandoned vehicles and panic. A train needed only rails. And there were rails everywhere. I stepped through the rear doors of the shop and out into the yard. The tracks stretched ahead in parallel lines, some disappearing into trees that had grown along them, others vanishing under collapsed loading docks or piles of old ties. I knew that somewhere in this mess there had to be locomotives. Yard goats, road units, something the company decided was not worth moving when they closed the place down. I walked the ladder tracks first, scanning with a professional eye. Every once in a while I saw a freight car, mostly box cars and a couple of tank cars, tagged with graffiti that had faded in the sun. The rails themselves were heavily rusted but still solid. Rail likes to cling to usefulness even after humans give up on it. Past the main bowl, near the tree line, I saw the hump. Riverside had once handled a little hump operation, where cars were pushed over a small rise and rolled down by gravity into sorting tracks, controlled by retarders and switches. That system had been ripped out, but the approach track still climbed a shallow grade. Near its base sat a cluster of locomotives, half hidden by brush. My heart rate picked up again, this time from something close to hope. There were 4 of them. The first was a faded blue road switcher, an EMD GP 38-2, the model number still visible under the rust streaks. 4 axles, good for local freight and light work. Behind it sat a larger 6-axle unit, an EMD, long hood, wide cab windows. Both were old, but those models were workhorses. They were straightforward, reliable, and parts were easy to cannibalize from other units. The other 2 were in worse shape. One had a side panel missing with wiring cut and hanging. The last was tagged with a big white X sprayed across the cab, dead in every way that mattered. Even so, 2 viable candidates out of 4 was almost a miracle. I climbed into the GP 38-2 first. The cab smelled like dust and old upholstery. The control stand stared back at me with familiar levers and gauges. Throttle, dynamic brake, reverser, automatic air brake, independent brake, horn valve, Sanders. The gauges were dark, of course. No battery, no power. I checked the battery compartment in the short hood. The cells were still in place, corroded and flat. I would need to raid the other units and see if any bank still held enough charge to wake a prime mover. Failing that, I would have to find a generator or fabricate jumper cables from a truck battery bank. First problem: power. Second problem: fuel. The fuel gauge needle rested at 0, but you never trust a gauge on an engine that has been sitting for years. I dropped down and checked the tank. When I opened the inspection hatch, the smell of diesel rose up, faint but clear. I dipped a clean rag in and came back with wet fabric, not a full tank, but not dry either. Diesel ages, but if it has been sealed and not full of water, it will still burn. The SD-42 behind it had a similar story. Batteries dead, electronics silent, but a tank that still held something useful. Standing there under the hot sun, with 4 dead locomotives in a dead yard, I felt a plan begin to form. If I could get 1 locomotive running, I could use it as a power source and a mobile wall of steel. If I could get 2, I could build a push-pull formation or keep one in reserve for redundancy. I could couple boxcars behind them and turn those into living space, storage, and workshop cars. With enough fuel and food, the train could move out into the countryside, scavenging towns along the line, never staying in one place long enough for the infected to box us in. A moving fortress on rails. It sounded ambitious, but ambition was cheaper than food, and all I needed now was something to focus on that was not the empty sky. I started with batteries. For the rest of that day and deep into the evening, I moved between locomotives, tearing out battery banks, cleaning terminals, checking wiring, and making rough jumpers from heavy copper cable I salvaged from the shop. I used a portable jump starter from my truck to give the first kick. The devices were never meant to wake a giant diesel engine, but they could help bring the control electronics and relays to life. The first attempt failed. Nothing but a click under the hood. The second attempt, after I reseated a stubborn relay and cleaned out a family of mice from a junction box, gave me something. When I pressed the engine start button on the GP-38-2's control panel, I heard the familiar whine of the starter spinning up. It dragged slow and labored at first, then caught speed as the circuits aligned. The prime mover turned over once, twice. On the third try, it fired. The sound filled the abandoned yard in a single instant, a deep mechanical roar that vibrated through the cab floor into my boots. The engine settled into an idle, uneven at first, then smoother as fuel flowed and air built. The gauges on the control stand twitched and came alive. Oil pressure, battery charge, main reservoir. The locomotive's lights flickered and then burned steady. For a moment, I just stood there with my hand on the throttle, overwhelmed. I had woken up a sleeping giant in a graveyard of steel. Then the practical part of my brain spoke up. The engine was loud, very loud. I stepped to the side window and scanned the yard, heart hammering. If the infected were attracted to noise, and the footage I had seen suggested that they were, this roar would be a beacon. I saw movement near the loading docks 3 tracks over. First one shape, then 2, then more, emerging from between rusted boxcars and the shadows of warehouses. They moved with that same uneven, relentless pace I had seen in the shop, their heads turned toward the sound. They began converging on the locomotive. I pulled the independent brake handle up, making sure the locomotive would not roll, and grabbed the pistol again. I had no intention of standing in a glass box and waiting for a crowd to surround me. I shut down the cab lights, moved to the rear of the cab, and slipped out onto the walkway. From there, I had a better vantage. They were still far enough away that I had time to think. The infected did not coordinate. They did not move with tactics or planning. They simply homed in on stimuli, sound, motion, and whatever sense allowed them to pick out living humans. The roar of the engine was their focus now. I could not turn that off. If I killed the prime mover, I lost the one advantage I had just gained. If I kept it running, I risked drawing more of them. In the end, I chose to keep it alive. I moved along the walkway to the front, climbed down the ladder, and kept the bulk of the locomotive between me and the incoming crowd. Using the steel body as cover, I fired only when one of them got too close. I did not aim for dramatic shots. I aimed for places I knew would stop a body quickly, above the chest, below the hairline. It worked. They dropped. But more kept coming from deeper in the yard. I used the locomotive not just as cover but as a tool. I eased the independent brake off, dropped the reverser into forward, and notched the throttle up to 1. The GP-38-2 started to move along the track at a walking speed, wheels clacking slowly over joints. The infected followed the sound. I guided the locomotive down the line, drawing them away from the buildings and from my truck. Once I had a cluster of them trailing us near the far end of the yard, where the tracks ended at an old embankment, I did something I would repeat many times in the weeks to come. I stopped just short of the embankment, checked that my way forward was clear, and then reversed. Not at speed, not recklessly. This was not a movie. The infected were not stupid enough to stand directly on the rail and wait to be crushed. But they were single-minded enough that they stayed in front of the sound source instead of stepping aside at the last second. When the locomotive eased backward, they rushed toward it. When it rolled forward, suddenly, they met several 100 tons of steel and did not win. I kept it controlled. I did not want to derail my only working engine by trying to turn it into a weapon. The point was not to use it as a plow. The point was to keep them away from me and from the yard's core until I could figure out a better defense. By the time I finally shut down the engine and let the yard fall quiet again, night had crept in, and the sky over the city glowed dimly with distant fires. I slept in the cab that night with the doors locked and the pistol under my arm. The occasional distant roar of sirens still cut through the night, but there were no long stretches of traffic noise anymore. The world had changed in less than a week. Over the next days, I fell into a rhythm. During daylight, I worked on the second locomotive, the SD-42. I traded usable components between units, scavenged filters, hoses, and electrical parts. I cleaned fuel lines and drained water from tanks. I tested air compressor systems and brake valves. Once I had the bigger engine running, I coupled it to the GP-38-2 and tested the multiple unit controls, making sure one cab could control both throttles. I repaired track within the yard where I needed it, replacing broken spikes with fresh ones from the maintenance shop, shimming loose ties with blocks of seasoned wood. I inspected turnout points and manually lined the switches I needed, locking them in place when I was sure about my route. I also hid the entrance as best I could, I closed the main gate and dragged an old boxcar across the approach track, blocking the line of sight from the access road. I parked my truck behind the mechanical shop and covered it with a tarp. At night, I kept lights low and listened to the new sounds of the world. Sometimes I heard distant gunfire. Sometimes an engine revving hard out on the road until it stopped suddenly. Sometimes nothing at all. I had food for a while. The office break room still had sealed snacks and canned goods. My backpack held emergency rations. But I knew it would run out, and I knew I could not live alone on a plan that only involved hiding in a forgotten yard. The idea of a mobile base moved from concept to necessity. I selected 4 boxcars closest to the locomotives. 2 were in good condition. 1 needed floor repairs. The last had a roof leak that I fixed with sheet metal and sealant. I repurposed them according to function. 1 for living space and sleeping, 1 for storage of food and tools, 1 as a workshop, and 1 as a makeshift infirmary and extra bunk space. I spent time cutting small, secure window openings high in the sides of the living car and fitted them with hinged steel covers I could latch from inside. I built simple bunks from lumber scavenged in the yard's warehouses. I bolted shelving into the storage car and sorted supplies into labeled plastic bins. I installed a small diesel generator in the workshop car tied into a battery bank. I mounted flexible solar panels on the roofs of 2 boxcars and wired them into a charge controller to top off those batteries during the day. It was not enough to power air conditioning or heavy machinery, but it gave me lights, radio charging, and small appliances. Every step I took was designed around one assumption: I would not be staying in Riverside Yard forever. Then the first survivors showed up. It was late afternoon when I heard the sound of a car engine on the access road. It was an old sound already, one I did not hear much anymore. I climbed into the GP 38-2 cab and watched from the side window. A silver sedan rolled up slowly, front end scraped and bumper hanging loose. It stopped at the half-bent gate, idled for a moment, then pushed through. I saw 4 people inside. I grabbed a pistol, slung my rifle, an old bolt-action hunting rifle I had found in a locker in the shop, over my shoulder, and climbed down from the locomotive. I stayed in the shadow of the mechanical building as the car came to a stop near the office. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the driver door opened, and a man stepped out, hands raised. Late 30s, hair cut short, dark circles under his eyes, wearing a button-down shirt that had seen better days. "Hey," he called, scanning the yard. "We saw the train lights last night. We're not infected. We just need fuel and somewhere safe to sleep. We have food. We can trade." My first instinct was to tell them to turn around and leave. More people meant more risk, more noise, more chances for someone to make a mistake that would draw attention. It also meant watch shifts, extra hands for repairs, more eyes on the horizon. And I was not built for being alone forever. I stepped out from behind the building with the pistol low but visible. "Stop right there," I said, "all of you out, hands where I can see them." They did as I said. One woman, mid-20s, jeans and a hoodie, hair pulled back. One older woman in her 50s, moving carefully. And a younger guy, maybe 20, who looked like he had not slept in days. Finally, someone stepped out from the rear seat on the passenger side. She moved differently from the others, controlled, deliberate. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing a cargo jacket and sturdy boots. A black backpack sat on her shoulders, straps tight, as if she had not taken it off for a long time. Her eyes swept the yard, noting angles and cover. When they reached me, they did not flinch. "I'm Daniel," I said. "This yard is mine now. If you want in, we do it on my terms. Weapons on the hood. Then step back." They had a handgun and a small pump shotgun between them. They placed them on the car where I could see them. I walked over slowly, keeping my distance, and checked the magazines without taking my eyes off the group for too long. "No bites?" I asked. "No scratches from them?" The older woman shook her head quickly. The younger guy hesitated, then shook his head too. The driver swallowed and said, "No, we stayed in the car when we could. If something got close, we drove." The woman with the backpack held my gaze and said nothing. "You?" I asked her directly. "No bites," she said. "If I was a risk, you would already know." "Name?" "Lena." The way she said it told me she was used to giving short answers and getting people to accept them. I did not accept it, but I let it pass. I searched them carefully, checking sleeves, collars, legs, looking for swollen marks or bandages that did not make sense. They were tired and dehydrated, but nothing else stood out. "All right," I said. "You can come in for now. You follow directions. You help with work. And you do not touch the locomotives without my say-so. Anyone breaks those rules, they leave." The driver nodded quickly. "Thank you. I'm Mark. This is my sister Anna, our mother Elaine, and this is Lena. We picked her up on the highway. She saved us from a crowd outside a rest stop." Lena's expression did not change. I led them toward the workshop, where I'd set up a basic staging area. I gave them water and canned soup, watched them eat, and listened to their story. They had been in the city when the first big wave hit the hospitals. Mark worked in IT. Anna was a nursing student. Elaine had been visiting. When emergency broadcasts told people to stay in their homes, they waited. When the first infected started appearing in their apartment hallway, they ran. They made it to the car and had spent the last 2 days trying to get out of the city. Every major route was blocked. The infected moved through traffic like a flood. They lost one of their original group when he got pulled out of the back seat at a stoplight. Lena had been on the outskirts, on foot, moving parallel to the highway. She carried the backpack and a pistol with methodical confidence. When she saw their car pinned behind a pileup while infected swarmed between vehicles, she moved in from the shoulder and cleared a path with small, controlled shots. Then she climbed in without waiting for an invitation and told Mark to drive. "Why were you out there alone?" I asked her when the others were asleep later that night. We sat at a workbench under the dim glow of a single LED lantern. "I was trying to get to a rail line," she said. "I figured if anything still moved, it would be trains. Didn't know about this place. I was headed for the new yard further west." "You work for the railway?" "Not directly." She paused. "I was with a government logistics team. We coordinated shipments, medical supplies, fuel, that kind of thing." "Medical supplies," I repeated. "Anything related to what is happening now?" Her eyes stayed on mine a second too long. "We heard rumors," she said. "Nothing concrete. I left when it became clear nobody was in charge anymore." She was lying, or at least holding something back. I did not push, not yet. Over the next week, our moving fortress began to take shape. Mark knew his way around electronics, so I had him help with the solar wiring, radio equipment, and diagnostic panels on the locomotives. Anna helped me clean and inventory the infirmary car, taking stock of medications and bandages we scavenged from the office, first aid kits, and abandoned houses within walking distance of the yard. Elaine cooked, cleaned, and reorganized storage with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent their life running a home. Lena gravitated to security. She spent long hours on the yard tower, watching the tree lines and the access road with a pair of binoculars. She moved through the locomotives and cars with interest, asking detailed questions about the controls, the air brake system, and the way the power flowed through traction motors to the wheels. She had handled firearms before. She shot in short bursts, conserved ammunition, and always chose cover over bravado. At night, when we sat in the living car and shared whatever food we had cooked, the train depot walls seemed to breathe with our voices. It was almost domestic, almost normal. But the infected reminded us of reality. They came more often. At first, it had been one or two wandering into the yard, drawn by faint sounds or the scent of humans. Then groups of 5 or 6. They did not move like a classic horde from a movie, but there was a pattern. The more we ran the locomotives, the more they appeared along the fence line. And they were starting to gather near the tracks. One morning, I stood with Lena near the end of the yard, looking out toward the main line that curved through the dry fields beyond. A thin haze hung over the land. Heat had baked the ground for weeks. In the distance, along the rail corridor, I could make out dark shapes moving in the shallow cuts and ditches. "They are learning," Lena said quietly. "They're not thinking," I said. "They're just following." "Following what?" I listened. The locomotives idled behind us at low notch, a steady rumble. I had started running them more often, both to keep systems healthy and to prepare for our first move out. We had tested the brakes and couplers, run a full brake pipe continuity check on the consist, and on a slow roll from one end of the yard to the other. "They respond to sound," I said. "Engines, gunfire, shouting." "The horn especially," she said. She was right. The first time I sounded the horn, it was just habit. Old rule, never move a locomotive without blowing 2 short blasts before you start and 1 long when you approach a crossing. The multi-chime horn on the SD-42 had a deep, piercing tone that cut through the air. Within an hour of that first blast, we saw infected drifting toward the yard from the direction of the main line. Not sprinting, not converging with any organized intent. Just gradually adjusting their direction until they followed the rail corridor like cattle trailing a feed truck. After that, I used the horn sparingly. We could not stay forever. Food was still the main limiting factor. Our scavenging walks had stripped nearby houses and stores. The nearest grocery was already looted and smashed. We needed to move out, reach other towns along the line, and harvest whatever remained. One evening, we held what passed for a meeting in the living car. I unrolled a paper track chart of the region on the table. It showed the main line heading west from the city, with sidings and small towns marked along the way. Riverside sat near milepost 24. Beyond it, the line crossed open farmland and a few industrial zones. 30 miles west, it passed through a mid-sized town called Ashford. 50 miles beyond that, another yard, the modern facility Lena had mentioned. "This is our world now," I said, tracing the line with my finger. "Steel rails and whatever is within a mile or 2 of them." "Do we know if the track is clear?" Mark asked. "No," I said. "But I know where the weak points are. Bridges, old embankments, places where heat and lack of maintenance could warp rail. We will move slow, inspect as we go. If we keep the speed under 20 miles an hour at first, we can stop in time if we hit a misaligned joint." "The infected?" Anna asked. "They will follow sound," I said. "Our advantage is speed and momentum. A locomotive at 20 miles an hour with a full brake pipe is not fast compared to a plane or a truck on a highway, but it is more than enough to outrun anyone on foot. Once we pass through, we do not come back the same way." Elaine frowned. "And if something is on the track?" "We stop in time and deal with it," I said. "Debris, derailed cars, vehicles, whatever. We clear what we can and go around what we can't. Worst case, we reverse to the last siding and take shelter until we can find another route or repair." Lena tapped a point on the chart. "What about here?" she asked. I looked. It was near Ashford, where a small spur peeled off from the main line to serve an industrial park. "Why?" I asked. "Before everything went wrong, there was a military shipment scheduled through Ashford," she said. "We were rerouting some hazardous materials traffic around populated areas. There was a disagreement about where it should be held in case of delay. The last routing I saw placed it on this spur. Hazardous materials, I repeated. As in chemicals? As in classified cargo connected to the early outbreak response, she said. The car went quiet. Even Elaine, who had stayed away from most of the tactical discussions, leaned in. "Is that what you were running from?" I asked. "I was running toward it," she said. "When communications started to fail, my team scattered. I still had a partial copy of the routing orders and a clearance badge that would open some locks. If that military shipment made it to the spur, it could contain protective gear, medical supplies, or information about the first infection clusters. Or it could be nothing," I said. "Or it could be very important," she said calmly. "We are building a moving fortress. If we can also become a moving clinic or a moving lab, we increase our chances." I studied her. "Is that what is in your backpack?" "Some of it," she said. She had never taken that backpack off for more than a few minutes at a time. Even when she slept, it lay within arm's reach. I had assumed it held ammunition, a change of clothes, maybe food. Now, I believed it held something else. "I will not open it without your permission," I said, surprising myself. "But if we are risking the train to chase a rumor, I need to know what you are carrying." She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she reached down, unbuckled the pack, and placed it on the table. The zippers moved with a steady sound. Inside, neatly arranged, lay several folders of documents in clear plastic sleeves, a tablet computer with a portable battery pack, and a metal case the size of a shoebox with 2 combination locks. "The documents are routing orders, inventory logs, and some internal memos," she said. "The tablet has encrypted files. The case contains something I was told not to open outside a controlled facility. I disobeyed that order by not leaving it behind when my supervisor told me to evacuate." "What is in it?" Anna asked in a quiet voice. "I do not know," Lena said. "I know the label said it required refrigeration and had an expiration date 3 months from now. It also mentioned experimental countermeasures." "Countermeasures," Mark said. "As in a treatment?" "Maybe," Lena said. "Maybe something else. But if the military train made it to that spur, there could be more." I looked at the chart again. The spur lay only a few miles off our planned route. Diverting there would not be a huge change in our path, but it might mean extra time in an area where the infected could gather. "We go," I said finally. "But we go prepared. We do not sound the horn unless we have no choice. We keep speed manageable. We watch the rails for heat damage and warping, especially near here." I tapped a section of the line where the track passed beside a large industrial site. "Why there?" Elaine asked. "Industrial fires," I said. "If something burned hot near the track, it can cause the rail to expand and kink. The heat we have been having will not help. A warped rail at speed is a derailment waiting to happen." "You really think about everything," Mark said. "I do not," I said. "I just think about the things that can kill us that I know about. The rest is luck." The next morning, we left Riverside Yard. It was not a dramatic departure. There was no fanfare, no waving flags. I performed it like any other departure I had overseen before the outbreak. We did a walk-around inspection of both locomotives, checked handrails, ladders, coupler heights, and safety chains, verified that air hoses were seated correctly between every car and that angle cocks were open for full brake pipe continuity. I connected the brake pipe to the rear of the last car and charged the system, watching the pressure climb on the gauge in the cab. Then I did a full brake test. From the lead locomotive, I applied the automatic brake, watched the brake pipe pressure drop and the brake cylinder pressure rise, then walked back along the train to make sure every car's brakes had set properly. Then I released them and confirmed the release. The consist was simple: SD-42 in the lead, GP-38-2 coupled behind it in multiple unit mode, then the workshop car, storage car, living car, and infirmary car. We left a couple of extra box cars and tank cars in the yard for future use if we ever returned. Everyone had their roles. Mark sat in the second locomotive's cab, monitoring gauges and ready to respond if the MU control failed. Lena stood beside me in the lead cab, binoculars and rifle within reach. Anna and Elaine were in the living car, ready to seal the windows if anything tried to get in. I eased the reverser into forward, notched the throttle up, and felt the train begin to move. The sound of the engines rose from idle to a deeper work note. Steel wheels rolled over steel rails, crushing plants that had grown between the ties. We slid past the mechanical shop, the office, and the tower where I had spent so many nights staring out over the yard. As we approached the main line, I sounded the horn once. Just once. The multi-chime blast echoed across the fields. I did it not for ceremony, but because old habits die hard, and there might still be someone out there near a crossing who needed to know a train was coming. As the last cars cleared the yard limits, I felt something inside me shift. I was no longer defending a fixed point. I was riding something that could move, adapt, and escape. The abandoned train yard behind us shrank in the rearview mirror until it was just another structure in a broken world. We started slow, 10 miles an hour at most. I watched the track ahead closely. Rust stained the top of the rail but did not hide the shiny ghosts of old wheel marks. The ties were dry, but not rotted through. Ballast had shifted in places, but the track structure still had integrity. We passed the first small road crossing half an hour later. The crossing signal towers stood dormant, their red lights dead, gates up. A car sat skewed across part of the road, driver door open, no sign of its occupants. I did not touch the horn. As we rolled past, I saw movement in a ditch 50 yards away. 3 infected, moving in that uneven, hurried way, heads turning toward us. They began to follow, stumbling along the ditch parallel to the tracks. They did not stand a chance of catching us. We left them behind. As the day went on, the countryside opened up. Dry fields, scattered trees, the skeletons of billboards advertising products that no longer mattered. The heat lay on the land, and the smell of dust came in through the open cab window. We saw more infected near the line. Some wandered aimlessly. Some moved toward the train as it passed, hands reaching. They were not clustering yet, but there were enough that I spotted at least one every mile. "I think they remember the sound?" Lena asked at one point, eyes on a small group standing near a culvert. "They do not remember," I said. "But sound means something to them. Movement, vibration, maybe scent in the air. All they know is that whatever makes that sound has life around it. And we are a big moving sound." "Yes." "Good," she said, "as long as we stay just out of reach." By early afternoon, as we approached the industrial site I had marked on the chart, I brought the speed down further. Ahead, the landscape changed. A cluster of low buildings stood near the track, some burned out, others intact. Long fuel tanks lay in a fenced yard, one blackened and split open from an explosion that had burned everything around it. The rails near that tank were discolored, the ballast fused in places. I slowed to walking speed and leaned forward. The rail ahead showed signs of heat buckle. It did not curve in a smooth arc. It kinked slightly to the side, a shallow but dangerous deviation. At 30 miles an hour, it might have been enough to pick a wheel and send us on our side. At 3 miles an hour, it was just a bump. "Hold on," I told Lena. Then I shouted back through the open cab door, "Mark, We are going crawling for a while." I eased the throttle down to idle and let the train roll over the damaged section, my hand on the automatic brake ready to dump the air if I felt anything unusual. The wheels rolled through the kink with a rough clatter, but the locomotive stayed on line. Once we reached stable track, I gradually brought the speed back up. "Can you fix that later?" Lena asked. "Yes," I said, "with time, tools, and some new rail segments. But that is a project for people who believe in schedules again, not for us." We reached the spur near Ashford the next day. We had stopped just outside town for the night, tying down the train on a slight grade with handbrakes set on several cars and both locomotives. We kept watch in shifts, listening to distant sounds and the occasional call from an infected that wandered too close. In the morning, we rolled slowly toward the junction. The town of Ashford spread out to our right, a cluster of houses, a small downtown, and a strip of industrial buildings along the line. Smoke still rose from somewhere deep inside the town, a slow, dirty column. The spur that led to the industrial park peeled off to the left, lined by chain-link fence and overgrown trees. The switch was hand-thrown. I brought the train to a stop short of it and set the independent brake. "Stay here," I told Lena. "Watch both directions." I climbed down, walked to the switch stand and checked the points. They were rusted but free. I lined the switch for the spur, secured the latch, and signaled to Mark with a hand wave. Back in the cab, I eased the train forward onto the spur. The industrial park was a ghost. Loading docks gaped open. Parking lots held scattered vehicles, some crashed, some simply abandoned. A few windows were broken. Some doors hung open. The spur split into 3 tracks at the far end. On the center track sat a cut of 6 flat cars. On the far track, partially sheltered by a warehouse overhang, stood a short line of gray boxy rail cars with reinforced sides and small sealed doors. Military equipment carriers. My pulse jumped. "I think we found your shipment," I said. We stopped well short of the military cars and set brakes. I did not want to hit them accidentally if something went wrong. Then Lena and I geared up. We wore work gloves, safety glasses, and improvised face covers. I added a reflective vest out of habit, then took it off when I remembered that there were no other trains that might hit us here. Our weapons were ready. We moved in a controlled manner, covering angles as we approached the parked cars on foot. Up close, the military cars bore markings, reporting numbers, weight limits, caution symbols. Some doors had been opened, others were still sealed. One car showed scorch marks along its lower side near the wheels, but the damage did not look catastrophic. "Look for any indication of what they were carrying," Lena said quietly. On the third car, we found a label still intact near the door. It referenced medical supplies, refrigerated units, and controlled access. The seal on that door was intact. Lena pulled out her badge and a handheld device from her backpack. The device still had power thanks to our solar charging system and the careful rationing of battery use. She pressed the badge to a reader panel near the door. To my surprise, there was a soft beep. "Backup battery still has juice," she murmured. A second later, a magnetic lock clicked. The door moved a fraction of an inch. We pulled it open together. Cold air rolled out. Not ice cold, but cooler than the summer heat. Inside, I saw racks of metal cases strapped down to the floor in neat grids. Each case looked similar to the one in Lena's backpack. "How is it still cool?" I asked. "Independent power system," she said, gesturing to a panel on the wall. "These cars have insulated walls, internal refrigeration units, and a battery bank charged by the train's electrical system when it is moving. If they shut down but sealed the car, it would stay below ambient for a long time." "Long enough for whatever this is?" I asked. Maybe, she said. We will not know until we test it. That word hung between us. Test. Before we could say anything else, we heard the first chorus of calls. It came from beyond the industrial buildings, echoing off metal and concrete, a mixture of harsh shouts and guttural sounds, not coordinated but overlapping. The infected had picked up our scent or our noise or both. On the tower there, I said, pointing to an old loading crane. We take a look before we panic. We climbed the stairs 2 at a time and reached the platform. From there, we had a clear view over the industrial park and toward the town. In the streets leading toward the spur, dozens of infected moved, weaving between cars and debris. They were not sprinting. They were just moving steadily, drawn toward the new source of activity in their world. We do not have long, Lena said. We have time to grab a few cases and some documentation, I said. Then we go. We did exactly that. Lena prioritized the cases by label codes she recognized from her work. We carried 4 of them back to our train, muscles straining under the weight. We also grabbed a box of paper files and a portable drive from a small office near the spur entrance. By the time we were back in the cab, the first infected had reached the industrial fence line. They pressed against the chain link, fingers curling through. A few found gaps and started to squeeze through or climb. Others drifted along the fence, drawn toward the rumble of the locomotives. We could try to clear them with small arms, Mark said over the radio from the second cab. No, I said. We do not waste ammunition on something we can outrun. We back out the way we came, no horn, slow enough not to derail at the switch, fast enough to be gone before they get close. The move out was tense but manageable. I reversed the train along the spur, watching the switch, the junction, and the crowd forming near the industrial park. A few infected broke through the fence and stumbled onto the ballast, reaching for us as we rolled by. They fell behind quickly. Once we were back on the main line, I realigned the switch for through traffic and we headed west. They're clustering along the tracks more now, Lena said later, as we left Ashford behind. She was right. We saw more of them moving near the line in groups. They did not stand directly on the rail, but they gathered near it, as if the corridor meant something to them. They look like they are waiting for something, Anna said quietly from behind us. They are waiting for noise, I said. For something that breaks the pattern of their new world. Engines, horns, gunshots, maybe even our voices if we are too loud. So we stay quiet, Elaine said. We stay smart, I said. For a few days, we did. We rolled through smaller towns, stopping only when we spotted untouched convenience stores or small warehouses close to the line. We would stop, set brakes, and send small teams out with lists and radios. They grabbed canned food, medical supplies, batteries, and tools. In some places, we saw signs that other survivors had already been there. Empty shelves, doors forced open. We did not meet any other organized groups. At night, we parked on sidings when we could find them, clearing switches and checking for defects before trusting them with our weight. We learned to sleep through the background noise of idling locomotives and the distant calls of infected. Inside the workshop car, Lena and Anna worked with the cases we had taken from the military shipment. They opened one under controlled conditions. Inside, nestled in foam, were small vials sealed with caps, along with an instruction booklet that looked more like a protocol manual than a marketing brochure. It included dosage guidelines, storage temperatures, and a list of organizations authorized to administer the contents. It is not a cure, Lena said, reading. It is a trial treatment designed to slow progression if administered early after exposure. It needs refrigeration. It expires within months. It was meant for hospital use." "And now we are the hospital," Anna said. We argued about what to do with it. Part of me wanted to save it for a hypothetical future where we found a laboratory, a safer place, or a group of doctors who knew more than we did. Another part knew that someone in our group or a future survivor might need it very soon. In the end, we compromised. We set up a makeshift refrigerated compartment in the infirmary car, using the car's insulation and a dedicated generator system. We prepared doses according to the manual but did not administer any unless we had a clear case of early infection with no other options. The decision weighed on me more than the throttle. Our moving fortress had a new purpose now. It was not just a way to outrun the infected. It was a place where the last fragments of organized medical response rode through a broken landscape on steel wheels. The infected learned faster than we did. It started with a simple mistake. We were approaching a large highway overpass one morning when we saw movement on the bridge. Dozens of infected crowded the roadway, milling aimlessly, bumping into abandoned vehicles. There was also a car wedged across the crossing where the road met the rail line. It had been hit or pushed onto the track at some point and now sat in our way. If we hit it at speed, we risked a derailment. I brought the train to a stop 100 yards short of the crossing. "We have to clear it," I said. "No way around." We could have used the locomotives to push the car off at very low speed, but that risked damage to our own front end if the car snagged. The safer way was to move it by hand. Lena and I went out with Mark while Anna and Elaine stayed on overwatch from the cab and the living car. We walked along the ballast, weapons ready, eyes on the bridge. The infected on the overpass did not react to us at first. They were far enough away and distracted by the general noise of the countryside. We reached the car and began the laborious process of putting it in neutral and pushing it off the track. Halfway through, something happened on the bridge. An infected near the railing turned its head sharply, looking down at us. Maybe it caught our movement in its peripheral vision. Maybe it heard the grunts of exertion or the scrape of the car's tires on gravel. It let out a sound. Not a word, but a loud, harsh exhale. Dozens of heads snapped toward it, then down toward us. "They heard us," Mark said. "Keep pushing," I said. We moved the car another few feet. Through the corner of my eye, I saw infected starting to funnel toward the far end of the bridge, where a ramp curved down toward the road crossing. The car finally rolled off the rail and into the ditch. I raised my rifle and put a round into the head of the first infected to reach the bottom of the ramp. The shot cracked the morning air. That was the real mistake. As the rifle report echoed, a chorus of answering sounds erupted from the bridge and the surrounding fields. Infected that had not been paying attention now, fixed on the new stimulus, they converged on the ramp in a disorganized wave. "Back to the train," Lena said. "Now." We fell back, firing only when one of them closed to dangerous distance. The walkways on the locomotive suddenly looked a long way off. We made it aboard, breathing hard. Anna and Elaine had already sealed the car doors and windows. I jumped into the cab, threw the reverser forward, and notched the throttle up hard. The locomotives responded with a roar that felt even louder after the relative quiet of the morning. We rolled toward the crossing at a speed higher than I liked for the situation, but the alternative was to get pinned between the car and the approaching infected. The first of them reached the track just as our front bogie hit the crossing. They rushed toward the movement. I felt a bump under the wheels, then another, then more. I did not look too closely at what we were rolling over. "Faster," Mark said over the radio, voice tight. I opened the throttle another notch. As we pulled away, I glanced back through the side mirror. The infected were spilling down the ramp and across the highway, filling the crossing area like water filling a depression. They followed the train with their eyes and bodies, moving along the shoulder in a loose, ugly mass. They could not catch us, but they did not need to catch us to learn something. From that day on, we saw more infected walking along the rails. They were not marching in lines. They were not forming disciplined columns, but they were using the rail corridor as a path. Steel track embedded in ballast became a guide, a direction to follow. When the horn sounded, which I tried never to do now, they reacted as if someone had lit a beacon. The moving fortress had drawn a moving shadow behind it. The last part of our first journey west was the hardest. We had hoped to find another yard beyond Ashford where we could resupply in relative safety. Instead, we found a derailed freight blocking the main line near a shallow curve. 2 locomotives lay on their side halfway down an embankment. Several intermodal cars had jackknifed, containers scattered. The rails ahead were torn and twisted, sleepers split. It looked recent. We stopped a safe distance away. I set the brakes and stepped out onto the walkway with binoculars. The derailed train had been heading east, toward the city, when something struck or undermined it. The containers bore familiar shipping company logos. Some were torn open, others remained sealed. There was no sign of the crew. "We cannot go through that," Mark said. "Not with our equipment." "We might be able to rebuild a path through if we had weeks and more rail," I said. "We have neither." "So we go back," Elaine said. "No," Lena said. "We do not go back. The infected behind us are already learning this route. We will not trap ourselves." "Then what?" Anna asked. I let the binoculars hang at my chest. I had already seen the answer. "There's a siding branching off to the right about half a mile back," I said. "It serves a quarry or a plant, I think. It will not take us where we plan to go, but it will take us somewhere else." "Do you know where?" Mark asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I know it will not take us back into the city. That is enough." We reversed slowly to the last switch, inspected it, and lined it for the siding. The track there was rougher, with more vegetation and some sections where ballast had washed out in storms. We traveled at walking speed for the first couple of miles, stopping to inspect and shore up weak spots with extra stone and timber from the workshop car's inventory. The siding wound through a scorched countryside, past hills stripped by quarrying and fields left half-plowed when the world shut down. In the distance I could see the faint outline of mountains. Our moving fortress crept along, engines working, cars rattling and squeaking in a familiar rhythm. Inside, people slept, read, cleaned weapons, and tried to remember what life felt like before their world shrank to a strip of steel. On the 4th morning after we left the derailed freight behind, I climbed into the cab and found Lena already there, watching the horizon through the windshield. "Could not sleep?" I asked. "Dreams," she said, "and something else. Listen." I stood still. For a moment, I heard only the idle of the engines and the small sounds of people moving in the cars behind us. Then, faint at first, I heard it. A distant sound, not natural, a tone I recognized. A horn, not ours. It came from far ahead, carried over the dry air. One long blast, then silence. Another, shorter one. The pattern was familiar, the standard warning at a crossing. Someone else was out there, on the rails, signaling that a train was moving. My first reaction was irrational joy. We were not alone. Someone else had survived with enough organization to operate heavy equipment. My second reaction was fear. If we had learned the hard way that horns drew infected along the line, then whoever was using that horn was calling every cluster of infected in earshot to their path. "Do we go toward them?" Anna asked later, after we woke everyone and explained what we had heard. "We are already on this line," I said. "If we keep moving forward, we might meet them. If we stop or reverse, we waste fuel and time, and we might meet them anyway if they are headed this way." "Maybe it is a good thing," Mark said. "More people, more resources, maybe a bigger group, maybe even the army." "If it is the army, they are moving through an environment they do not understand," Lena said. "Or they understand and are desperate enough to risk it." "You think they know about the infected following sound?" Elaine asked. "They will learn," I said. "Everyone learns now, or they die." We decided to keep moving. I set our speed to a cautious 15 miles an hour and kept my eyes on both the track and the horizon. We did not hear the horn again for hours, but I felt the echo of it in the way the infected began to appear more frequently near the line. Some were moving in the same direction we were traveling, as if they had been following the earlier train and were now waiting for the next stimulus to latch onto. When our locomotives approached, they pivoted and followed us instead, trailing behind the cars in a loose, uneven stream until we left them far behind. By late afternoon, the siding merged back into a main line. The tracks here were in better shape, the ballast clean, the alignment true. Signal masts stood dark over the junction. Beyond them, the line cut through a shallow valley with tree-covered slopes on either side. We rolled into the valley at a steady pace. The air smelled different here, cooler and damp. And that is where we saw the other train. It sat on the main line, nose pointed toward us, but motionless, about half a mile ahead. Two sleek passenger units in company colors, silver and blue, coupled to a string of coaches. The windows of the cars glinted in the fading light. No smoke from the engines, no movement on the roofs, no signs of life. I brought our train to a full stop. "Mark, set brakes," I said over the radio. "We are not moving closer until we know what that is." We sealed up the cars and moved forward on foot, following the ballast, weapons ready. As we approached, the silence of the passenger train unsettled me. These units had been built for speed and comfort, with air-conditioned coaches, soft seats, and entertainment systems. They represented a world that now felt distant. The lead locomotive's side door stood open. Inside, the cab was empty. Control screens were dark. A coffee cup lay on the floor, its contents dried to a stain. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just absence. The passenger cars told the rest of the story. We moved through them, car by car. Some seats were empty, luggage still stored overhead. In others, we found signs of panic. Bags torn open, belongings scattered, broken glass near emergency exits. We found a few bodies, but not many, and none of them moved. The infection had done its work here and moved on, or the infected had left, chasing new sounds and scents. At the rear of the last coach, we found a makeshift barricade that had been broken from the inside. Whoever had been trapped there had gotten out the other way. "Could be survivors nearby," Mark said. "Could be infected," I said. "Either way, we are not staying long." We did not salvage much from the passenger train. A few medical kits, some bottled water, some non-perishable snacks in the cafe car. Most of the useful supplies had already been taken. On our way back to our own train, Lena fell into step beside me. "That horn we heard," she said. "It might have been them before they stopped here." "Maybe they hit a signal failure and did what they were trained to do," I said. "Use the horn to warn crossings." "And the infected learned again," she said. We reached our locomotive, climbed aboard, and sealed the doors behind us. As the engines rumbled to life, I looked back at the passenger train one last time. It looked intact, almost ready for service, It also looked like a trap now, a stationary sound source that might wake up and call the infected right to it. Our moving fortress could not afford that mistake. "We still use the horn if we have to," I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. "But we use it as a weapon, not a habit." Lena heard me. "How?" she asked. "Noise is a tool," I said. "We can send it away from us. A spare locomotive, a stationary horn, and a timed generator. We can make the infected follow the wrong sound while we slip through the quiet path." She nodded slowly. "You think like an engineer," she said. "I think like someone who had safety drilled into his head for 20 years, I said. "Now I just have a new list of hazards." We left the dead passenger train behind and rolled further into the valley. That night, as the engines idled and the cars creaked softly on their springs, I lay in my bunk in the living car and listened to the new rhythm of my life. The low hum of the generator feeding the medical equipment in the infirmary car. The muted voices of Mark and Anna as they argued about whether to try to reprogram the tablet's encryption. The scratching sound of Elaine writing in a notebook no one else had seen. And, faint in the distance, a collection of calls that rose and fell in a way that still made my skin crawl. The infected were out there, learning paths, recognizing sounds, and following us without ever understanding what we were. We had turned an abandoned train yard into a moving fortress. We had armed it with steel and fuel and a fragment of the last organized medical plan. We could outrun most threats, carry survivors, and push through roads that no longer held cars. But we were not invisible. Every time the engines roared, every time the horn sounded, every time we cleared a crossing or a blockage, we left a trail of echoes behind us. The infected were following those echoes, slowly and blindly, but relentlessly. I did not know how long we could stay ahead. I did not know if the cases in our infirmary car contained anything that could truly change the course of the outbreak. I knew only this. The rails still stretched ahead into unknown territory, and as long as steel met steel under our wheels, we had a chance. In the morning, I would climb back into the cab, wrap my hand around the throttle, and guide our fortress through another stretch of scorched countryside and warped track, with a secret in our medical car and a growing shadow at our back. And if the time ever came when we had to choose between silence and the horn, between drawing the infected toward us or sending them after a decoy, I would make that decision from the only place I truly trusted anymore. The left-hand seat of a locomotive that should have been scrapped, rolling through a world that had forgotten its own rules. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.